Hi there, so welcome to the July update for the UK House Price Index for Scotland. This is really useful information. It gives you really good insight as to what's happening in regards to properties throughout Scotland and also in your micro regions. So whether that be Fife, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow, it gives you really good insights to what's happening within your localities in regards to the types of property that are selling, the average price point that they're selling for, and how many transactions are completing in those areas as well, and whether those percentages are rising or falling. So it's really useful information. If you think it is of interest to you, and you don't have time to kind of digest all of the show information, click on the link. All the details are there. You can read the index report. Literally will take you maybe 10 minutes, but you can just focus on the areas that are important to you as well, and it'll give you a really good insight as to what's happening. So let's look at some of the headlines. So what we are seeing is that average house prices at the moment in Scotland have increased by 3.3% in the 12 months up until July of 2025. That's £192,000 is the average house price at the moment in Scotland. And when we talk about the micro regions, I'll give you exactly what it is in your areas and locations as well, and whether that has risen or fallen. Over the piece in Scotland, though, that is estimated to be down by 5.4% on the 12 months to the previous July. But it was above the average house price annual inflation of 2.8% across the whole of the UK in that 12-month window. So absolutely Scotland is overperforming. When we look at that as well in regards to comparing it to the volumes of properties that are selling. So when we talk about volumes, what we mean are the actual transactions, what is completing. So the health of the market is really gauged in two ways. It's gauged by, of course, values of property, but primarily it's engaged by the transactions. And what the transactions are literally keys handed over, money's in the bank, the home has moved into new ownership. So when we look at those as well, so again, we get a slight delay on this just because of land registry. So whilst this is the July report, it's actually the May transactions that we will get in this information share. So comparing that to May of 24, the provisional review at the moment that they have put out for May of 25, the volume of transactions across Scotland as a whole has actually decreased by 1.6%, but in the UK increased by 6% across the piece. So actually, the UK-wide is very well performing at 6%. The transactions have decreased slightly in Scotland as a whole, but actually, again, when we get to your micro regions, I'll tell you what they are in your areas so you can get an idea of where you're actually performing in your location. What types of houses? We're going to talk about those as well in regards to what's most popular. So in Scotland, your detached house had the highest annual percentage increase, a change of all of the property types that are out there. They increased by 5% up until July of 2025, and the average detached property now is estimated to be valued at £352,000. So really large increase there, 5% year-on-year increase in your value of your property. What we're seeing here is very much what we're seeing in the market, month on month increasing. And if you watch our weekly update show, absolutely you're seeing the detached properties are performing really, really well. All properties are moving relatively quickly, depending on what location you're in and also what price point you're in. But actually what we're seeing at 350 and above, it is taking slightly longer. So it's interesting to see that actually that's the best performing area. So maybe there's a little bit of a shift there. So that's definitely something for us to be watchful of. As we always say, no one report in 1 month is a trend, but it does give us some insights as to what the market is performing like. So good for you to understand where you're sitting in regards to your property and how that looks against others. So in regards to other types of property, so your flats and your masonettes had the lowest annual percentage change. They increased still by 1.7% in the 12 months to June of 2025. And the average flat or masonette is currently selling at 137,000. So again, really strong market, good price points. If you look at actually the cost of living, so generally what we would say is it's 6 times wages. So if we were to look at Fife as a micro region, let's just pick that one. The average salary in Fife at the moment is 32,000 per annum. If you work that in sixes, then that's working out at about 195,000. So actually, if affordability is great like that, and you can afford an apartment at Masonette at 137, this is a really affordable area to stay, isn't it? And actually that mirrors quite a few of the other regions as well within Scotland. So again, really interesting for you to look at that when we look at then what the price point looks like for certain types of properties. In regards to the local authorities, so I've spoken about your micro regions. What does that look like for you? Well, actually, this is where it really gives us good, strong indicators as to the strength of the property market. So in Scotland, 28 out of the 32 local authority areas have shown an increase in the average house prices in the 12 months to July of 2025. The highest annual percentage change was in Renfrewshire, where average house prices increased by 11% year on year. That's a big shift from the 12-month period, 11%. And the average property in that location is slightly lower in value than across Scotland. So the average property there is 162,000. But the lowest annual percentage change was in South Ayrshire, where average house prices decreased by 2.8%. So they're obviously one of the ones out of that kind of 28 that did to the 32. So they're part of that kind of 4 areas that have decreased in the 12 months up to July. And the average property price there is 160,000. But if you think across Scotland as a whole, you can get a flat or a masonette for 137. That's really still quite affordable, is it? But as I said, with all indicators, you know, the history of the market, it changes continuously. It typically will fluctuate month on month. It's important not to put too much weight on one month's performance. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill into all of these stats that I've shared with you and show you good examples of it. But as I say, if you want to then read the article, click on the link. All the information is there for you. I guess one of the things we've got to look at as well is, well, what does that mean for us in regards to, you know, how will mortgages fare? Will interest rates change? And that's a really important one. And that's something certainly in the mindset of many people at the moment. Sophie and I actually did a show the other day, and it was all about, you know, selling now or waiting. And actually, it was almost as though people were getting into kind of analysis paralysis, and they weren't moving because they were just getting so confused with what they needed to do next. And that mindset of thinking, well, we'll wait and see what happens in a year. We'll wait and see what happens in a year. But actually, what we've seen is year on year, the prices are still increasing. So if you're not actually on that ladder, you're missing out, aren't you? Because you're possibly still paying rent, you're living with your parents, you've not purchased a property yet, you've not paid, say, 12 months worth of mortgage payments that have actually eaten into your equity, and also saw the property market improve in value as well. So that's definitely something to think about. But I can understand why people are quite hesitant. If we look at inflation at the moment, for instance, I mean, inflation, when it was announced in September, is currently sitting at 3.8%. 3.8%. Now, the plan with the government was to have it down to 2% by the end of the year. That's just not going to happen. And forecasts actually think that it will actually continue to increase. We could be as high as 4% by the end of this year. And that's had a knock-on effect actually in regards to what the Bank of England are doing with interest rates. But if we look at inflation as well, at 3.8%, what a lot of people are looking at as well is actually, well, that's all very well 3.8% inflation, but how has that impacted me? One of the biggest things I've noticed, even just myself, you go to the supermarket and all of your food prices have gone up. I know this is going to sound crazy, but even the price of mince, it's mental how much mince costs. Daft, I know, but just thought I'd put that out there. But it's not surprising, actually, when you think that inflation across all services is at 3.8%, but food inflation prices are sitting at 5.1%. That's far away from the 2% target. And it's not a surprise because actually I'm seeing it in my shopping trolley. You'll be seeing it in yours. And that can be a bit kind of people thinking, well, actually, each week my money's going up. Maybe we'll just wait. Other people are thinking, well, actually, I can't see it changing and I need to move and my circumstances warrant that, so I'm just going to do it. But there's a lot to consider and it can be quite confusing. That's why these types of reports are really helpful in allowing you to have some really good information that you can then base a judgment on. But yeah, food price inflation, 5.1%. And then the other part that's really being hit as well is hospitality, hotels, restaurants. You'd expect that because food inflation is at 5.1%. They purchase lots of it. So they're obviously being hit by that as well. But far off from the target at 2%, isn't it? And so I guess we're seeing some people maybe getting a bit hesitant around that. They did meet the Monetary Policy Committee on the 18th of September. They have decided on that point to keep interest rates at 4%. They don't now meet until November 6th. So nothing's really going to happen there until we're almost into winter. So it'll be interesting to see how that may change. And that may drive some different factors, mightn't it? I guess it's the big unknown. We don't really know what's going to happen there, but it definitely gives us some food for thought, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do with you just now, I'm just going to get a slide up and let you see that, because I've given you lots of quick information there, but I want to just give you some really good highlights. I'll just get that slide for you. Give me 1 wee second. There we go. Really important to kind of understand what the numbers are saying. And I'm just going to get another slide for you in 1 second. Let me just get that one up for you. I'm going to stop sharing that one and get my next slide up, because this one's a really interesting one as well. This is one when it's kind of showing you in graph format of what it actually means. Give me 1 wee second. We're going to just share that one. There we go. And that's it there. Really difficult to see in this because I can't make this any bigger, unfortunately. But what you're basically seeing from the bottom here is July 21 through to July of 25, and Scotland as a whole over the last 4 years, and what that annual price change looks like. So July 21, we would expect to see it really high because that was in the COVID times, wasn't it? And then it kind of comes down a little bit into January of 23, and then down to July of 23 becomes the lowest that we've seen it. But we're constantly seeing it increase since July of 23 to a steady performance right up into July of 25. And I think that's really beneficial to see it in those terms, because I think sometimes when you see them, it's just too much information all at once, isn't it, when someone's just speaking it to you. So it's really good to see it in graph format. But as I said, if you want to click on the link, you can have a better look at that as well. Then what we're going to look at is some of the actual percentage increases in values, and I'm just going to share that with you as well. Give me 1 wee second. I'll just get that information for you. But it's a real good information share, isn't it, to have all that information and give you something really solid to work with. So now we're going to look. There we go. Give me 1 wee second. There we go. Again, really difficult for you to see it on here, and I can't get it to zoom in too much, unfortunately. But what we're looking at here is the prices and how they are improving or not improving. But as we saw, out of all of the authority areas, 28 out of 32 of them did have an increase. So if we look at, for instance, the city of Dundee, again, that's down here. So City of Dundee, the average house prices today are 143,941 as at July. That's versus 138,377. So that's an increase of 4%. If we jump to the City of Edinburgh, the average house price is 288,670. That's on an improvement from 276,308. So that's an improvement of 4.5%. Glasgow's performed really well, 7.1% improvement. The average property there is 190,616. So that one's just under the average across Scotland at 192. But that has improved year on year from 178,000. So 7% improvement is fantastic, isn't it? If we then jump to Fife, the average property in Fife at the moment is 169,873 versus 164,941. That's an improvement at 3%. We go to Perth and Kinross, really performing well. They're sitting at 10.8% improvement. The average property there, 230,734 versus 208,264. And then our highest, as we saw earlier on in the statement, was Renfrewshire at 11% improvement. So they've jumped from a value at 145.5 up to nearly 162. So that's a great improvement for them. If you're in that location, then that's great to know, isn't it? Because it might actually help you make some decisions on where potentially you might go with your next property, if at all that you're thinking of moving. It might just give you an insight as to actually what you could afford in regards to the return on your investment that you've currently got at the moment. And that's really something worth considering, isn't it? Because you just don't know what's going to happen in life. Everything changes. We move for reasons, don't we? So good to get a good insight as to what your property is looking like value-wise. I'm just going to look at now for you to actually map this for you. So if we look at mapping it, here we go. So if we map that there, you can see all your regionals. So your average prices that are kind of guided here are your top one here is your bold red. That's if you've got a property that area that's at 230,000 or more. And then it goes all the way through, say, to your yellows where you're at 150,000, and then down to your blues where you're into the kind of 90s, 109s. But actually, if you look at this map, there isn't much blue, is there? If we jump across it to Edinburgh, you can see that Edinburgh is sitting in that red zone just here. If you look at Fife, then just here, you're sitting in that kind of orange stroke yellow area as well. And then if we go to Dundee, you're sitting very much in that orange area as well. So again, it gives you good insight just to kind of map it and get a visual for what that means for you in regards to your property type and what your prices are in your location. Let me just grab that other additional information for you as well. So I'm just going to show you, because this one is really important, because as well as understanding what your property value is, you want to know really, well, what style of house have I got and what is that selling for? And that's really good information for you to understand as well. And it's going to be no surprise to you when we see this, that we have your property values here to your detached property, as I mentioned earlier on. So your detached property in July of 2025, the average detached house is selling for 351,768. That's against a value at 334,937. That's a 5% increase year on year. If we look at your semi-detached, they've got a 4% increase. So your average semi-detached property is 216,773 versus 208,389. That's a really good price point, isn't it? And slightly over the average across Scotland. But semi-detached properties, you get so much for your money as well. I think people forget about semi-detached, the fact that you get your garden, potentially your driveway, all that additional space, but actually you're 150,000 less than a detached property. If you don't mind having neighbours, it's really great value for money. And as well, a lot of ex-local authority properties are those semi-detached, and you get such massive rooms, don't you? So you get a lot of house for your pounds. If we then look at your terraced, they're a 4% increase as well. So at the moment, they are 176,405 versus 169,699. And then your flats and masonettes, which we've already covered, 136,000 versus 134, which is an increase at 1.7. So across the piece is where your average value of properties are coming from, at 192,000, and that's up by 3.3%. So some good improvements across the page actually in regards to the property types and also the values that are going up there as well. Then we look at the transactions. The transactions ones, there's so much information on this page actually that I'm just going to talk to you about it. So if we look at transaction volumes, we're looking to see if there is an increase in the transactions. And as I mentioned earlier on, transactions are literally keys handed over, money's in the bank, new owners have moved in. And if we look at the City of Dundee as a starting point, so the average transaction has actually gone down slightly. So they're sitting at 233 transactions, whereas July of 24, it was 255. So it's 22 properties. It's still 1.5 properties a month less. If we look at the City of Edinburgh, pretty much similar picture, 1,028 versus 1,036. So that's 8 properties, it's less than one a month. If we look at Glasgow, 884 versus 973. Actually, that's nearly 100. So that's quite dramatically different. So that's a couple of properties a week less in transactions. If we then jump to, say, Fife, 601 versus 649. So a slight decrease there as well in Fife. And then if we go to, say, North Lanarkshire, 469 versus 479. And then Perth and Kinross, 256 versus 279. That's not a surprise when you think that the property values are going up, because the supply is obviously there. So supply and demand will always drive the price point up as well. So interesting to see that those areas are the ones as well where property values have gone up. So lease transactions, they're paying more to get the properties because perhaps they've just not got as much choice in those locations. If we then look at sales volumes across the piece though, and this one's a good one. So if we look at them from kind of May 21, which was your kind of COVID times, if you like. So May of 21, the sales volumes across the whole of Scotland were 8,751 properties. Jump to May of 22, 8,598. If we then look at May of 2023, 7,673. Then May of 24 really picks up again and actually exceeds the post kind of middle pandemic area and goes up to 9,125. And then May of 25, 8,840. So actually, whilst you're seeing a year-on-year decrease from May of 24 to May of 25, we're actually still higher than we were in May of 25. We were higher at 8,840 than we were in May of 21, than we were in May of 22, than we were in May of 23. And then you've got a slight peak in May of 24, but actually in May of 25, you've got the higher over the 3 out of those 4 options. So it does show you that actually the market has been quite steady, which is a positive position to be in. So your property statuses as well, we like to look at resold properties. So obviously pre-owned, someone's lived in it before, they're selling it again, versus perhaps a new build property, and just to see how they have developed and grown in regards to what people are paying for them, has that improved or not over the year. So with a new build property, the average price at May of 2025, and the reason, although this is July report, and the reason that we get it for May is purely and simply the land registry is kind of 3 months behind the reporting. So we have to take what they kind of can provide us. So the new build property at the end of May of 2025 was 309,420, which was a monthly change of minus 5.6%, but still an annual improvement of 9.2%. So 10% nearly you've added onto your new build property values if you're purchasing a new house. Your existing resold properties, the average price at May was 175,302. That was a monthly change of basically standalone. Nothing moved there. That's what it was the previous month as well. But it still is an annual increase at 3.1%. So certainly the resold properties are still improving as well in costs in regards to that improvement at 3.1%. And that's what we're seeing across the board, isn't it? When we looked at all the property types, they were all going up in value. Buyer status for me is always a really good one as well. Who's spending and what does it look like? So if we look at that in regards to, say, your first-time buyers versus your former owners. If we look at first-time buyers, the average price in July that a first-time buyer was paying for a property was 157,954. That was a monthly change of 0.2%, but an annual change at 3.1%. So again, great to see those first-time buyers come into the market. As I mentioned earlier, with interest rates being the way they are, will they ever go back to those long-term lows that we had after the pandemic at 1.5-2%? I think at the moment, you can get some really good fixed deals at the moment for around about 4.2. So actually, if you were fixing something at 5 years at that rate at the moment, at least you know what your budget is for the next 5 years. If you're not planning on moving, most people move on average every 7 years. So if you're looking to fix rate your mortgage just now and you're getting around about the 4% point, it's actually a really good position to be in. And then that's fixing your budget for the next 5 years. But in that 5 years, you know, you'd like to think your salary is going to go up, your property value is going to go up, your equity is going to improve because you're paying off your mortgage payments. So it's a real strong position for first-time buyers at the moment to get on that ladder and actually start making some changes with themselves in regards to building a portfolio and building some wealth for themselves as well on the property. And your first-time buyer generally is your person who is not yet started their family. So they're looking to then go down that route in a few years' time. So it's good to be able to get yourself in a position of strength, isn't it? If we then look at your former owner occupiers, the average price that they are paying for a property is 239,000. That's a monthly change of 0.9 and an annual change of 3.4. So again, across the piece, we're expecting to see that it's a 3.3% of buyers. So a strong position as well for your former owner occupiers. And again, people are still moving. They need to move every 7 years in general, unless something major happens in life, and then that makes a difference. This for me is the real big one, because actually this one for me is something that many sellers will ask the question, and it's about your cash buyer. what does a cash buyer look like today? And that very much has changed. So if you are out there at the moment, you've got your property on the market, you're potentially looking to move in the next month or two, and your ideal situation is to have a cash buyer, you may want to rethink that depending on what your property value is, and maybe have a discussion with your agent, because at the moment, as at July, your average cash buyer is spending £177,388 on a property. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, of course there are, but it's something just for you to be thinking about in regards to maybe you're holding out for that particular person. You may be missing out on other opportunities. You may miss out on actually someone who is a previous owner occupier. You've seen there that 3.4% of previous owner occupiers are moving, and they're spending 255,000 versus 177 for a cash buyer. So just something to think about. Maybe have that discussion with your agent as well, because it may change your thought process on how you move. And I guess it really just depends on your circumstances as well. Why are you moving, and how quickly you need to do that. But it's just food for thought. If we then jump to the mortgage buyers, your average mortgage buyer at July is 199,708. So actually they are borrowing and paying more than the average Scotland house price at 192. So that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? So your mortgage buyers, the monthly change for them is 0.6 and your annual change is 3.7. So 3.7% of people buying are buying on a mortgage, and 2.7 are cash buyers buying in cash, but at a much lower rate at 177,388. So that's an interesting one. The mortgage one for me is a really good one as well. And I think that that's really reflective of the fact that we have seen mortgage rates steadily stay consistent around about the 4% mark. I don't foresee that that's going to be changing anytime soon, in all honesty, unless they can get inflation under control, as we've spoken about. So it'd be good to see what happens there. As I mentioned earlier on, there's lots of information there. Some of those stats you can't generally see on those graphs because the graphs are quite tight, aren't they? Click on the link. All the details are there. Likewise, if you have perhaps been in that situation, you're one of those buyers, you're one of those sellers, you've got some questions about it, you've had a really great experience, by all means, feel free to share it. Absolutely happy to answer any questions that you have. And it gives us good information to share on them with other people. And that's it for this month. And I'll see you when the next report comes out next month. Take care. Bye-bye.